if we're deploying AI and we know intentionally why we're doing it, not just, oh, here's a magic trick, let's see what happens. But if I know, like, I'm having a really big problem with customer churn, and I think AI is going to help with that. Yes, I'm going to start with some small experiments, but I should have in my mind what are the insights that I want to get from AI about my customers that are going to help me relate to those customers better. And then kind of have a measurable process where certainly in 3 months, 6 months, I should be able to look back and say, did this tool help me address those critical pain points? Are my customers churning less or not? And if not, why?
I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is Leaderbook AI, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. Are we accelerating performance or just automating broken processes at scale? Today, we're solving one specific problem. How should private equity-backed revenue leaders implement AI in sales without increasing risk, losing trust, or moving fast in the wrong direction? JD Miller, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Felicia.
I'm excited to chat today. JD, if you could start us off with sharing a little bit about your background and your expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been a B2B tech sales professional for almost 30 years now. I began at a very small .com in the late 90s as employee number 26 of a company that grew to be the world's largest tech IPO until Google took our title from us. And so ever since then, I've been hooked on rapid growth, private equity-backed organizations. I've been through 5 exits, and now I work in private equity as a sales and marketing advisor to a portfolio of tech companies.
Wow, how thrilling, I think it sounds, to be on so many transformational roller coasters.
It's really cool to see a lot of different kinds of companies go through lots and lots of different changes.
Take me back to the moment you first realized that AI was going to fundamentally change sales. So, where were you? What happened?
Well, I think AI got a big boost in the public's awareness when Chat GPT debuted in like November of 22, I think. And at the time, a lot of us were sort of turning to this tool as like this party game or magic trick, where it's like, oh, it can write a haiku or it could do all of these kind of quirky things. And so I was experimenting with Chat GPT then, but professionally was also planning a sales kickoff for the next year. And anytime I do a sales meeting, I like to have these really pithy one word themes that underscore whatever the key message of the week is supposed to be. And so I had just started working at a company with a brand new name and they were claiming their voice in the market and their name had a musical connection to it. And so I popped all of this into an AI tool and I said, come up with a theme for my sales kickoff. And it immediately suggested this word forte to me. And then it explained that, it's a musical term, it means being loud and bold, and it would really match all of this, market making stuff that we were doing. And then it continued to say, for your activities, maybe you'd like to bring in some drummers and some fireworks at dinner and all these kind of noise making things that are going to underscore your message. And it really dawned on me that, wow, this wasn't just a tool that actually had really good suggestions to make. And so over the next couple of months, I kept iterating on it. And then, my eyes really opened in January as I started editing my opening keynote speech to that event. And I sent the tool a draft of my comments. And what was really crazy is it knew enough about me and my voice from reading things I'd written online or podcasts I'd been on that it proactively was telling stories that I knew I was going to tell. And, it's not always right, but it was maybe 80% accurate and a huge time saver on me getting that keynote written. So that's really when I started to realize that we were just in the beginning of something that was going to be really helpful in a whole variety of different contexts.
Yeah, I love it when my tools just know a little bit more about what I'm thinking. It's almost like a mind reader. And I thought, gosh, yeah, I probably should have mentioned that, but it already knew it about me anyway. So that's always a delightful surprise. When you started digging into it, what was the very first question that you asked yourself about where AI actually belonged in private equity backed orgs?
Well, so I come from a social science background. Before I started working in tech, I earned a PhD in organizational communication. And so I've really spent the last 25 years or so really thinking carefully about the intersection of business, technology, and humanity. And so, many times, I think like a lot of organizations, as I started to think about the role of AI, it wasn't, how do I stick my head in the sand and pretend it's not going to be here? But it's how do we balance that technology with, the business needs and the humanity of our employees so that it doesn't go too far.
Yeah.
And as I started thinking about it, it really reminded me of that very first sales job that I had. I was working for a web content management company, and our sales pitch was sort of, I'm calling from the internet. Do you need a website? And, back then people were really worried about what the internet was going to be. And one of my first customers was one of the big airlines who bought our product to, suddenly let people buy tickets online instead of call 1-800 airline and, talk to a person to book that. And so, when I started thinking about where AI fits in revenue organizations, it reminded me of those questions people had back then about where do .coms fit? Because people were so worried about all of the call center agents who are going to lose their jobs because they no longer were going to sell you the ticket. And what happened is when we made it easier for people to buy tickets online, today travelers are traveling 300% more. And so those call center agents maybe aren't booking the ticket for you, but they're doing all of these other like customer service humanity things. And so I think, the same thing is probably true of AI is it's going to automate some things that we do, but it's also going to create opportunities for us to really double down on our humanity and do all of that empathy and trust building and relationship building at sales. That really is a competitive differentiator for us.
Do you think that it would lead to more sales, like the more empathy, the more trust building? Do you feel like those are factors that lead to enough, not just more sales, but enough sales to warrant the purchase price or the cost of AI integration?
I do. I think AI helps us develop a lot stronger relationships. So if we think about my first interaction with AI, that said, I've read everything JD's written, I've listened to every podcast he's been on, and here is his voice. For a seller who's getting ready to go on a sales call with somebody, the ability for an AI tool to really quickly consolidate everything we know about that person or the company or the challenges that they're facing can really start to seed them with immediate points of connection and immediate points of how do we solve problems and how do we start developing a relationship? So I don't waste half an hour, with a blank sheet of paper, how we used to in the 90s, and say, tell me about your problems and tell me what keeps you up at night. I can jump right in as an informed participant and say, I saw this quote of yours in the news, and it suggested that you have this issue, and here's how my solution is going to solve it. So I think, yeah, I think AI is going to help us really be better at the human side of selling because it's taken a lot of the routine automated background tasks off of our plate.
When do you think that extra revenue, that boost shows up? Because it's not going to be, tomorrow, like the next day, right? I'm just curious, like, how long should leaders wait to expect that metric to change?
Well, and so I just wrote a book about this. I started researching AI tools in sales, and it's coming out in April of 26, this, handbook of sales tools. And I think you're right. It's not going to be you're going to put in this tool and the next day something is going to happen. But I talk in the book about a process of taking us from quick experimentations and really finding the leading indicators that suggest something is happening and, continuing down the journey. And so I do think if we're deploying AI and we know intentionally why we're doing it, not just, oh, here's a magic trick, let's see what happens. But if I know like I'm having a really big problem with customer churn and I think AI is going to help with that. Yes, I'm going to start with some small experiments, but I should have in my mind what are the insights that I want to get from AI about my customers that are going to help me relate to those customers better. And then kind of have a measurable process where certainly in 3 months, 6 months, I should be able to look back and say, did this tool help me address those critical pain points? Are my customers churning less or not? And if not, why? What's wrong with the relationship or the recommendation or the process that I still need to go back and refine.
Yeah. So just this constant or continuous learning of how to tweak the workflow or the sales cycle based on what your what the differences are between pre like leveraging AI and post.
Yeah. And I think private equity firms in particular are good at this because even outside of AI, anytime private equity invests in a company, they talk about what's the investment thesis. And they always have a theory that, with our investment, if we change this process, if we change this person, if we merge these companies, it's going to lead to these results. And so, the best PE firms for years have gotten really good at naming their thesis, looking at measurements, testing the thesis and the results, across pretty short time frames. And so I think AI is just another avenue or another tool in that, total box of implementation or work with a portfolio company to see if we can get better results.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which is why I think PE is so interesting because they see like the bigger picture, at the 30,000-foot picture of what's happening. I really want to double click on what you had mentioned earlier because in your work, you started interviewing portfolio companies and evaluating over 150 tools. So, what did you expect to find in your investigation and what did you actually discover?
Great question. So you're right. About a year ago, I realized that AI is, not just a fun little toy, but it's really something that people are using for really serious sales things. I said, I want to get smart about this really fast. So fortunately, I work with a PE firm that's got a couple of dozen companies that we're invested in. And I began by just talking to every CRO I could meet and say, what are you using AI for? What are the processes? What are the tools you're using? And then I started to augment that with internet research. And I was really, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but it's a really crowded marketplace. Again, it reminds me of that .com boom when everyone wanted to put a .com on something. And so all of a sudden, as I started looking at sales applications of I found 158 different companies that claimed to be an AI powered sales tool that was going to make your sales organization, become better. And so really you could name any part of the sales cycle it's using a synthesized, simulation of my voice to leave voice messages on scale? Or is it, running 1,000 pricing scenarios and trying to figure out what's the best way to contract with a customer? There's someone, pick any part of the sales process, and there's someone who says they have an AI solution for it. I think what I learned was the very best instances are those that are making you a better person or better able to do the human part of selling. And so, I used to work for a manager who talked about delegate tasks to the lowest cost resource who could do their job. And often that was like a BDR or an intern. Well, now the AI tool is like the new lowest cost research that I can send all that data manipulation to and list building and stuff like that. If I'm a manager who says, I'm going to use AI to do all the busy work of figuring out, forecasts and updating my forecast report and all of that, and I can redirect those hours of my day to actually coaching my sellers or inspiring my sellers and doing that thing that only I can do as a human, I think those are the best applications for us.
Can you provide an example?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this data manipulation stuff is a really simple place to start. And so for our entry level sellers, they're trying to set appointments or begin with cold, do cold calls to connect with customers. When I began selling in 1999, it took forever to figure out who are all the companies in my territory and who is the CFO of each of those companies, and what's their email address and what's their phone number. And what I found was to manage my territory, I was doing that 5 or 6 hours out of the day. And then, having a short amount of time to pick up the phone and even a shorter amount of time to actually have conversations.
Yeah.
When I use an AI tool to say, delegate all that rote kind of stuff, I can have a calling list generated for me in 15 minutes. And now that means I have 7 hours of my day to really engage with those folks and comment on their LinkedIn posts and, meet up with them wherever they happen to be speaking or, doing different things. And really starting to build the relationship instead of just chasing the data.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really exciting. I think a lot of companies are feeling the same way. But I'm curious about, was there a specific conversation that you've had with a CRO or CEO that made you think, we're either about to do this brilliantly or very badly?
Yeah, and I think we're probably going to do both. And again, I think
Fair.
that probably is also like that dot-com boom where, you know, back then we set out, trying to, automate the, online purchase and delivery of 50-pound bags of pet food and things like that. Um, I think, and it's also as I've been interviewing these vendors, I think it's 158 vendors now that I've taken demos from or, reviewed products for. And I'm really hearing this voice in my head that says, just because you can doesn't mean that you should.
Right.
So, I took a vendor pitch who was talking about territory assignments. And they had all this really cool whiz bang stuff about, looking at your territory and seeing which region has people that really want to buy and highlighting those buyers to your sellers. And, there's a lot of excitement there. And when I began my sales career, we had none of that. I just had, I had a 5-state territory in the Midwest. We hoped it was somewhat equitable to the seller in Texas, who just had a single state. And so I'm listening to this vendor's pitch and I'm like, wow, this is really pretty cool. Like we can think about territory boundaries and focus or redefine the territory according to where there's really demand. And then the pitch pushed a little bit farther to this notion that, you don't have to redo territories every year. You could redo them every month or every week or every day, or you could just have a world where we don't have territories at all. And you just wake up in the morning and I hand you, you know, here's where activity is right now. And that's the moment where all of a sudden I was like, hey, the human being in that seat is really not going to like that situation. Like I want to have a relationship with my customers and continue a conversation over a course of time. And so just because it's possible for us to, get in the moment adjustments of who I'm supposed to work with, it's not going to go over well when I'm the rep who actually has to, participate in that world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you tell me about a company that tried to move fast with AI? What did they automate first and what went wrong or what went right?
Yeah. It's so I think about that word automation, and I actually don't think that's where we start first.
Okay.
I talk about this a lot in my book. It's got a 3-level framework, and I actually think we start with very small pilots and experiments that don't automate anything. Today you and I are on this podcast. We talk about AI like everyone's using it, and I think your listeners are probably pretty sophisticated and are probably there. But just a year ago, there was a survey that said 63% of American workers had never touched an AI tool. And so, while I'm sure that that's changed a little over the last year, people are still building their AI literacy and they're learning how to prompt ChatGPT or whatever their tool is. And so we have to start by just building their trust and their comfort with using these tools. And so, the companies that I see that have done this really well began with small pilots that said, we're not changing the business. I'm just going to give you this tool and show you a couple of ways to get comfortable with it. So it might start with saying, go take this transcript of our conversation today and put it through an LLM and tell me what I might have missed or what should I maybe do as a second step. Just as a way for me to get comfortable with like clicking the buttons and asking the questions. And eventually, after I do that a couple of times, I start to trust the output of the tools. And then we can become more forward thinking and we can turn on, the automated AI component of our meeting software and have it say, well, now listen in real time to the conversation and give me a prompt that Felicia just said this name of this competitor or, talked about this business problem. And now feed me the script or the talking points that I should use to respond to that. Um, and that may be enough, and just that kind of level 2 use. Certainly at the end of the day, we imagine a world where we're going to have these automated bots that, work on my behalf and speak in my voice and maybe have a whole bunch of email exchanges with you under my name and I'm not involved in them at all. Um, but we can't start there. We have to begin with like trusting the tool, getting comfortable with the tool, really training the tool so when it's going to speak on my behalf, it doesn't lie and it doesn't, promise things that I wouldn't promise and so on and so forth. And then of course there's going to be a lot of governance and legislation around that covers a lot of these things too.
Yeah, I have to agree with you wholeheartedly on everything you just said. I think that there's a movie that my kids watch, and it's about like ants, and it's a joke. There's a joke in the beginning of this movie where the ants are following a line and they're, carrying their food. And then all of a sudden, one ant like steps out of line on accident. And then the whole line just freaks out because something has changed. And then they have to like carefully bring the line back in and they feel better. And it's such a funny moment, but change, even the slightest bit, is scary and very uncomfortable. And we as humanity, I think, need to build the resilience a little bit more to change and what that looks like. I mean, I would consider myself very adaptable, but I also am like, I have to do this thing differently, and I'm like, and it could be the smallest thing, but it's about I'm thinking about the unknown. And it's like, how much time is this going to take out of my day to learn this new thing that may not work? I think that part, the unknown, the ambiguity, is a little bit scary. But if we can figure out how to build that muscle, I think we would be able to absorb AI a little faster and be able to be open to that creative workflow. That makes sense.
I think you're exactly right. I think about I was a late adopter for a person who has a PhD in communication and technology and online groups. I was a very late adopter to Facebook, and I was like, that's just a fad. Like, I'm not getting involved in it. And I woke up one day and I said, holy cow, everything in the world is on Facebook and the businesses I work with want to interact with me. And because I haven't even tried, I'm totally left behind. And so, it's really taught me that, when the next waves of tools come, and there's always going to be another wave, we have to at least, you know, dip a toe in the water and learn something about it because you don't know what's going to take off and how deep it's going to get ingrained in the culture. And
Yeah.
to stay relevant, we've got to use them.
Yeah. One more point on that, which is I think that a lot of like the biggest factor of how people can change, especially with an enterprise, is really going to be around leadership. And it's what we've discovered in our research. And I don't think enough people are talking about that as a factor. I think a lot of people are talking about it where a lot of the action happens, right? Which is within departments or with colleagues in a specific type of workflow or situation, right? But if you step back and you think about, well, how do I make change for the entire organization to kind of row together? I think leadership is going to be that biggest factor. And I think that depends on how adaptable and transparent leaders are. And so, with that being said, I'm curious to learn from you, the leaders that you work with, are they stepping up to that challenge of being more adaptable and kind of walking the talk, or are you seeing something different?
Yeah. Well, and this as a leadership expert. I mean, I don't think there's anything unique about AI than any other change that they need to lead us through. And the more transparent and the better communication you can have with your team about what are we doing, why are we doing it, what's the outcome we're looking for, the better it's going to be. And so, I think the best organizations, like really basic stuff that has nothing to do with AI. If I can tell a call center agent, hey, this year the company is trying to grow whatever percent, and that the way we're going to do that is we're going to retain more customers. And we're going to do that by having customers really love our support. And one of the ways that they really love our support is when they feel that they get answers to their questions faster. Having that connection is so much easier than saying, you're a call center agent and I expect you to pick up the phone on the second ring and don't talk for more than a minute and a half. And it is the same ask, but helping someone understand, how does this thing that's touching my life affect the big company goal and what's the role I play in is really how motivation happens. And so I think the same thing with deploying, AI tools or any other technology is like, we're going to go try to do this AI thing because we think it's going to support this business problem. And here's the outcome we're looking for. Also, we don't know. We've never been there before. No one else has been there before. So we're going to start by trying this thing, and this is what we're going to measure. And then we're going to come back and ask, is it working? And is it not? We're going to change course. I think that's how you win the hearts and minds and get people to follow you.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think that some leaders know how to do that very well. Some leaders know that they should be doing it and don't know how to do it, right? And it's tough because they have to change first, if that's the case, right? In order for the rest of the organization, like a shift in leader, shift in the organization, right?
Absolutely.
Somewhere in all of this, and kind of what we've been talking about, I think, there is this tension between automation and humanity. When did it become clear to you that AI should enhance the trust and not replace it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really great question. Um, anytime especially in sales. I'm not sure. I've not run finance teams, I've not run programming teams, but in sales organizations, it's really clear to me that, I'm not really about pushing a contract. I'm really about building a relationship, building a solution, and solving a problem there. And that fundamentally is a human experience. And it's about creating a connection, and it's about creating consensus with groups of people about when we buy this product, this is what it's going to do for us, and all the rest of it. The organizational, PhD in me did tons of research on like group decision making, and how actually even in sales, it's not just saying, here's the ROI that you get from this product. It's also often, here's your personal agenda, and here's, the political stuff that's going on. And so, good salespeople have always been tapped into that kind of humanity piece of what their job is. Um, and so when I look at tools like AI, we always have to remember that although they might feel like people, they're just pattern matching.
Yeah.
When I tell AI I'm having a bad day, it has learned that the patterned response is, I'm sorry, I hope tomorrow feels better for you. But it really doesn't have any sense of emotional understanding, perspective taking, sense of self to engage in that. And so when we think about AI in sales processes, then, there's a whole lot of things that it can do and make us better at, but it isn't going to be good, or it isn't yet good, maybe in science fiction movies, at really having the interpersonal connectedness that the best salespeople have. And so I believe like AI is going to give us more time to do even more of that. And the people who double down on their interpersonal skills, their communication skills, are going to have long, long careers.
Can you give us a specific example where you can kind of share exactly what that looks like?
Yeah. I think one of the places that I'm thinking about this tension now is, the legal kind of element is finally catching up to us. I love the state of Tennessee has this law they call the Elvis law, and they've figured out the cute acronym. But what they're trying to do is say, you know, AI is capable of simulating people and their likenesses and their voices and all of that kind of stuff. But just because it can do that credibly doesn't mean that it should be doing that. And so, I think about Elvis a lot. And of course, if I put on a wig and an Elvis costume and I came to your, Vegas and performed a wedding for you, you'd know that I wasn't really the king of rock and roll, and you'd understand how to do that. If I showed up in your hometown and I put on a wig and a suit and I walked around and said I was the CEO of your company, people might not understand that that's not who I am. And AI is making that even more possible for me to take someone's photo and their voice recording and start injecting that into, little 5-second commercials that talk about how great my product is and all of that. Now, at the end of the day, I think we resolve these issues, with common sense. We shouldn't need Tennessee's Elvis Act to tell me not to do that. Like, we all know I shouldn't go pretend to be your CEO. I think that our innate sense of right and wrong kind of tells us when to use these tools and when not to. But I think those are the kinds of blurring the lines of humans and technology in these fundamentally relationship building contexts that are going to be, more fraught and more legislated over time.
Looking back now, if you were advising a CRO stepping into their first private equity backed company tomorrow, what story would you tell them about getting AI right? What are the tips and tricks that you would make sure that they hear from you?
Yeah. So I do think back to those late 90s when we were talking about how the internet was going to change the world. And, probably 90% of the things that we were predicting back then never came to pass. Um, but some of the things that seemed so wild and out there actually did. I remember working with a computer scientist named Tom Gruber who told me he was going to build this way that you could talk to your computer because it would be a much better user interface than the point and click mouse that you had before. Well, I thought that idea was totally ridiculous. And then he went on and founded this company called Siri that I use every day to talk to the computer I carry around in my pocket on my phone. Um, and so, I think about that, and I'm not so presumptuous as to believe that I could tell a CRO exactly how to get things right. But I can tell them that if they're not at least experimenting with the tools today, they're probably going to be left behind. And so, my core advice is be clear on the business problem that you're trying to solve. Be clear on what your thesis is that you think AI is going to do for that problem. How are you going to measure your experiment? And then, put in a system where you come back again to say, did it work or did it not? And how do I tweak the next evolution of that? And I think that's how they'll be successful.
Yeah, sort of like a slingshot, approach, trying to slow down, try a few things, do some trial and error, and then, pass your competitors essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, JD, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's great to chat with you.
Visit us at leaderbook.ai. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us. So thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.